off the parent, what we do is we wrap around that parent and we say, okay, well, let me help you. Let me tell you things. Look me in the eyeballs. You will figure it out. You're the most important person. All you need to be is you. We've learned to say all of those things to wrap around a family. And if she's struggling and if they need support, we add more support around that, and then we remove the support when they need it. We don't remove the child. We wrap around the family. And I feel like that's what we need to start doing with parents, because what we've sort of done is give me your kids, I'll take them off of you, I'll do the spiritual stuff, I'll hand them back to you. And actually my job is to wrap around you as a family, and I'm committed to that. And so what families need in order to step into these things are two things. They need vision and they need skills. Vision, well, one of my favorite places to do this is, well, first of all, I will use this analogy and then I'll back it up. For me, what I found is that parents have learned to see the church like a dentist. And so they have learned to see us like, I just went to my dentist. She's the nicest lady in the world. But when you go to the dentist, they ask you questions that are kind of intrusive. Do you brush your teeth 2 times a day, 2 minutes at a time? And you go, yes, I do. And then she says, do you floss? And I look, this is when I, a child of the living God and a representative of his kingdom on earth, look her straight in the eyes, and I lie straight to her face. And I go, yes, I do. And I mean, half the time, sometimes, most of the time, I don't remember. And I look at her and she's like, okay, well, let's see, shall we? Hop on my table. And then she puts you on the table and then she roots around in your mouth and exposes all of your vulnerabilities and failures and calls out to her friend who's typing it down there like 1, 2, 3 plaque, 4, 5, 6 cavity. And then tells you things like you should be brushing your teeth. She's like magic. She's like, oh, I think what you're doing is you're switching this way and you're missing this tooth. And I'm like, how can you tell? She's like, I can see everything. And I'm like, oh, I believe you. And so she does that, and she fixes my mouth and she cleans it up the way I should have done it in the first place. And she does everything that I'm supposed to. If it's hurting, she fixes it. I'm grateful. And then she leaves with the little lecture of do it better next time. And I'm like, yes, ma'am. And then I leave. And I'm so glad she exists, but I still feel very exposed and vulnerable. And she saw the bits of me that were embarrassing. And I think a lot of people, parents in particular, feel that way about the church. That we have a definite view of what we want them to do. You should be reading your Bible at home. You should be praying with your kids. You should be getting your kids to church. And they have all these shoulds that they know. So when their kids don't come to church, they feel slightly apologetic to us because they're failing us and their kids. And they have this sort of stress of if they know. There was a children's pastor I just saw on one of the Facebook groups that put up, I just want to let everyone know that we as children's pastors definitely can tell if you're discipling your kids at home. And I'm like, don't say that out loud. Like, that is such a dentist thing to say. We'll know. Like, how threatening is that? This sense of that we're secretly seeing them and secretly judging them is huge. And they will have that not just from senior leaders, but from youth leaders, particularly youth leaders, but children's leaders as well. They're waiting for you to say, look, we noticed that you're failing with your child. You obviously are. And that is really hard for them. And so instead of being the dentist, and I say this all over the world, and you will be particularly pleased with it, I think we need to be IKEA. Do I say it right? IKEA. IKEA. Because IKEA has an amazing approach to people. It also has an agenda. Like a dentist, it wants you to buy stuff, but it has a completely different approach. IKEA says, welcome. You are unique and different than everybody on this planet. Come explore all of these little experiences and see what works for you. And so you walk through and you're like, oh my goodness, do I need a black feather lampshade? Maybe I do. I don't know. Is it me? And you go and you touch tables that you have no intention of buying, and you lay in beds, and you sit at table desks and be like, oh, one day I'm going to have something like this. And you try it out. You sit on couches. I have pictures that I've taken in IKEA of people like sitting there in beds and lounging on couches, and it's wonderful. And you go for fun. People in the UK go for fun. People will go, I'm going. What are you planning on buying? Don't know, just going for fun. And people will go, can I come? And whole carloads of people will go to IKEA just because they want to experience it. And spouses will go not because they enjoy it, because they want the food. And there's something for everybody. And for even people who don't like the experience of IKEA, there's a shortcut. They're like, we know you don't want to be here. Just walk on the shortcut. And you're like, thank you very much. You get to experience that. Every time I walk in, I have pictures that I was going to put on a PowerPoint for you, but I didn't today. My husband took them, of a picture of me with the thing I came in to buy, and then the shopping cart full of stuff that I left with that I had no intention of purchasing, but discovered on the way because there was a new lampshade that I liked. And I just discovered all sorts of new things because it facilitates my vision for my family rather than facilitating their vision for my family. And I think often as children's leaders and church leaders, we have a vision for what we want for your family, and that is oppressive, that's a dentist. But if we approach them and say, can you imagine if every parent felt like us saying, welcome, you are unique and different than every family. You have a vision for your kid and for the way you want to do faith with them. How can we serve you? How can we help you? How can we find what makes you feel strong and flourishing in that? I would love every parent to feel that. And so that's a shift in my heart. I had to get away from, I want you to read your Bible at home, to how can I help you help your kid meet and know Jesus in the ordinary every day? And how can I make you feel confident to do that? And that shift was huge. And so in this vision thing, what I found was we were giving people visions of the hard work that you could do. Hey, here's something you could do. Gather your 6 kids around a table and do a 45-minute Bible study with them. It's what the church says would be a good idea. And they're like, that is not inspiring to me. What is inspiring to them, what motivates them, is a vision. IKEA does a wonderful job of this. You walk around and you go, I love that wardrobe. Look at that closet space. Now I'm willing to go down to the floor and pull this huge heavy thing off the thing and threaten my marriage by trying to build it because I believe in the vision of what I had touched. Can you imagine if IKEA was as strong as if all it was the warehouse at the bottom? You just walked in and people were like, hey, how hard do you want this to be? And then you just pick things based on how hard it was. I feel sometimes that's what families feel when we give them things. We're like, here, do this Bible study, this Bible, how hard do you want it to be? And they don't have a vision. What they need a vision of is children's spiritual lives. Because they don't know that. I've told you stories of what a 4-year-old who loves Jesus looks like. We've talked about what God-connected teenagers look like. I would put to you that your average parent has not heard stories of what is on offer to kids in a life with God. They don't know that a 12-year-old can genuinely intercede for the bullies that are hurting them at school. They might not know that a 15-year-old kid who is struggling with self-worth can do these things. There was a 9-year-old who was struggling with anxiety, really bad anxiety. She was writing in her journal every night for about an hour, and her mom came to me. She was like, we need help, because her kid was writing like, I hate me, I can't believe I did that, why would I do that, and just was spiraling in her head about all the things that she did wrong that day and what she hated. And we did some chatting and catching and talking, and she and God decided that what they were going to do is she was allowed to write in her journal, but then God said, then I want to read it with you and correct it. And she was like, okay. And so then she would write as much as she wanted, and then she would have to go back with God. And this was what she and God decided, was that she would go back and she would have to read it out loud to God. And she would say, I feel like nobody likes me. And then she was supposed to ask, is that true? And God would say, no, I love you. And so then she had to cross that out. And instead of saying, I feel like nobody likes me, she then had to write, God loves me very much. And then she went through, and that was her nightly thing until she stopped writing about how much she didn't like. And then she just started writing about what God was doing. Now, if you don't know that that's possible for a 9-year-old to do, then you don't have the hope for your 9-year-old that they might have a relationship with God that way. But we never tell those stories. And so people need to hear those stories. Not that those are the ideal stories, not that that's what we're aiming for, but that is what God has on offer for kids. I almost died. We all saw that, and I survived. And so tell stories of kids' spiritual lives. Make them anonymous. Ask kids to share their own stories first. Tell them in ways that encourage you. Instead of saying that these are amazing stories of kids, what I tend to do is just weave them into sermons and weave them into things of saying, I was talking to my friend the other day, she's 10 and she was telling me about how this happens in her life. And this was so encouraging to me. It made me think I need to do that more. And so when I was sharing this story about the anxiety, I'd asked her permission. I asked if she wanted to share it. She's like, no, but it would be helpful for other people. So I shared it. And then there was a teacher who came up to me and said, I would love to do that. Please let that girl know. Thank you so much. And so an adult learned from that. Children's spiritual lives, they need visions of that. They also need key truths. In It Takes a Church to Raise a Parent, the Swedish book, there's a whole chapter on the key truths that they need. Things like parents will always be more spiritually powerful than the best church in the world because you were the closest circle around them. And so therefore, me on my most mediocre day is going to be, me on my best day is going to be more, you on your most mediocre day is going to be more significant than me on my best day because God has positioned you beautifully for influence. I have to say that over and over and over and over and over again. There are lots of these key truths. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be authentic. I say that over and over and over again. Parents need those things. And then the other thing they need are skills. Now, we've already talked about some of the skills. What I found is I went straight to resources. Parents don't need skills, they just need stuff to do. So pandemic hit, and we all started throwing stuff at parents. Here, do this, do this. And what parents need is how to be, not just what to do. And so they need to know about creating windows. They need to know about framing, which I also include in here in the Parenting for Faith course. I include how to answer any question your kid asks, because that is one of the biggest fears parents have, is what if I can't answer their questions? I will teach you how to answer any question that any kid asks beautifully. It's 4 steps. Once you nail that, you're safe. I talk about how to unwind wrong views of God, or warped views of God, because kids get weird views of God. You get teenagers who are sitting there thinking that, I don't want to have faith in God. I don't believe he's real anymore. Why? Because he gives cancer to babies. No. So what you're rejecting is a weird view of God. You're not actually rejecting God. So let's have a conversation about that. And what I find sometimes is that they have these warped views. That is a natural part of kids' learning. But we've got to learn how to walk alongside of that. How do you have open conversations at home without being scared? Chat and catch, which you've already learned. And then I teach them surfing the waves, which is essentially just how to come alongside your kid's spiritual life and help them no matter what's happening. And so those are the 5 key tools. We have a whole bunch of free courses that we do. I think it's being translated into Swedish right now. But you don't need the course. You might want to watch the course just for how to give those tools. But you can give those tools in a course. One of the things I find helpful in a course is that they have to talk about it. And I find in our church communities, it's very rare to turn to someone else and be like, how's your kid spiritually? Like, that's often a conversation we don't have. So putting them together is really helpful because it forces discussion. But you can train them to create windows just by, in a church service, once a week, going, hey, your stories are powerful and important to other people's discipleship. So, we turn to each other and say a story of one time you were really struggling and God gave you a Bible verse that was helpful. And so why don't we, and you might not have a story. If you don't have a story, say, I'm just here to listen. But if you have a time that there was a scripture that really helped you, let's just tell that story. And you just get them used to telling the stories because they need that. I know one congregation who just spent a whole year working on creating windows. And then in children's ministry and youth ministry, gave away chocolate that said, right, we talked about David and Goliath today and how God rescued you. If you can come back with a story from someone of a different age than you of when that was real in their life, you will get chocolate. Go forth. And so if you have parents at home, then great that you can ask those questions too. But if not, then you go attack another person in the congregation. Ask the story. You come back in it. That's building relationships, and that's feeding into that. And so we can create those things. Those are, for me, what we do. is we do that. We help them do that. We take them on the journey, whether it's a course, whether it's drip feeding into a congregational setting. We're giving that vision in 1,000 different ways that you can do those things. If you can be a church that speaks into parents and says you are powerful and significant, and talk about the significance of God in kids and young people's spiritual lives, and equip parents and congregations, I would suggest everyone needs these tools, and how to do this, how to help this, then that is equipping parents for a lifetime. Do you have any questions on that? Yes.
Surfing the waves.
Yes. Surfing the waves is that kids' spiritual lives go like this, woo, chung, woo, chung, about certain things. And parents often think that a kid's spiritual life should be like, I started great, and I just steadily increase and have never any issues. And so then when I ask parents, if you could show me with your hand what is your spiritual life looks like over the last 20 years, everyone goes like this. And then I'm like, so then why are you freaking out if your kid's in this moment? Because we're hoping that it just goes like that, but actually it goes like this. And there are significant waves that happen. Your kids will love coming to church, and then not so much. And then your kid will love reading the Bible, and then not so much. And that's a normal part of it, because there's always a new wave. I'm like that in my life, let's be fair. I'm like, I love reading my Bible. No, it's all about worship in the mornings. And then, no, it's all about, I love going to it, And we're like that, but every wave that's happening, whether it's spiritual or not, your kid could be super into sports. If your kid's in a sports wave, then I suggest you start connecting them in with Christian sports people who share the testimony and talk about how they see God in it, and reading biographies of people. And there's loads of those. Jump on board with whatever your kid's doing and help them find God in it, is what I do. Right. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to discuss, and then we'll come back and we'll hammer all these questions, and then you will leave. So 10 minutes of discussion. You might want to discuss what you see is happening already. You might want to tell your stories of being parented. You might want to just reflect where you could create situations in your church community for any of those. However you want to react, feel free. You got 10 minutes, and then we will answer questions. All right, I'm going to bring you back after you finish your thoughts. All right, then. Right. Okay. So um, I'm gonna bring us back just because I want to give us the time. I would suggest, I'm not saying we fully answered these questions, but I feel like we've hit a little bit of including every generation. But if we have a follow-up question, feel free. I feel like we've hit the prayer question at least on that one. So I just want to hit these things just to hit things, then we'll have space for other questions. Children and communion. Yes, no, how to explain it, how do we prep for them? So I want to tippity-toe around the theology of it, in that different churches will have different views, and I support all of them. For me, I am an advocate of children and communion because I feel like there is, when you can understand the various levels of Jesus dying on the cross for your sins, then you could do it. I don't think I fully have an understanding of the fullness of the gospel yet. And so for me, once I see people responding to the message, then for me, I'm like, it's okay. But what I tend to do is equip parents to make that decision for their kids. And so I work in partnership with them to say, we as a church are for that, but what we really are for also is this. So I've worked in churches where they're like, no, not until they're this age, and you have to go on a course. And I've worked for churches that are like, it's completely up to the parents to decide however you want. And I'm comfortable with all of those because I believe that children are disciples just as much as me, and parents know them better than I do. What often parents don't know is how to make that decision. And so often I have an answer of how I see that. And I can say, this is how I see it, but it's also up to you. You have a close-up view of what your kid's life is like. So I'm up for it. How do I explain it to the other kids who don't get to have that? It kind of depends on if the hoop they're jumping through is your hoop as a church or the parent hoop. And so in the places where parents are making the decisions, then I'm like, well, you got different parents. Why don't we ask them? And so then sometimes what I facilitate is coming to parents and saying, your kid was wondering, when he might be free to take communion. And then I can ask questions like, when were you thinking and why? And then the parents can answer me and the kids can hear that, because sometimes the kids will ask in a tone that the parents just say, well, because, where I can tease out some reasons. And often it's not a no, it's when will it be the yes? That is the question that I can help facilitate parents in. And I also will say that from the front. If it's a parent's decision, I tend to say, if you're wondering how to know when you want your kid to start communion, come have a chat with us. We can even throw on a morning and a breakfast, and we can talk about what are good things to think about when you're deciding whether your kid wants to take communion. So you can support it that way. Or you can do it in a more formal way. What I've written, and I'm rewriting right now, is a course for parents to do at home. I used to work for the Church of England, which meant that we required a certain age and a prep, communion prep. And church was required to do the communion prep. And I started looking at this going, why is the church prepping when this would be a great thing for parents to prep? So I wrote a at-home activity-based thing for parents, conversations for kids to have with their parents about this. And so one was like explaining grace and watching a movie and talking about grace and those things. So not so much the mechanics of it, but more I want to make sure you understand grace. I want to make sure you understand a representation thing. So I have them make a meal of a memory that they have. And so just like Passover was a memory of a situation, we can make a pizza remembering us of, these are the pepperonis of the hot time we went to Spain and, whatever. Because I want you to know that these are symbols of a memory of something. And so I just include that, and then I give it to them, and I'm like, great, you want to go on communion? Here's the workbooks, bring it back when it's done. And then it's up to the families. They can take a year, they can take 2 years, they can blow through it in a week, fine. But then they do that. And one of the bits is that they have to sit, and one of the bits is that they have to engage with lots of different congregation members, because you're being part of the body, and therefore you can't just exist as an isolated person. You got to get to know people, and you got to be willing to talk to them. And another thing I did was you have to sit and watch. And so you get to sit at the front where everyone's taking communion. You got to take, what are people doing before they take it? You know, are they praying? Are they worshiping? Are they being quiet? What song is being played? What's the practicals of it? And they get to touch it and see things. And so it depends on how formal you are and how not formal you are. But for me, there's something about providing ways of prep that can be useful to families. So right now I'm in a church where we let parents decide. And we're equipping this, but this equipping is going to be voluntary. It's just going to say, if you want something formal to go through with your kids, great. If you just want to have conversations with them, fine, it's up to you. But that's how we do children and communion. How do you engage with youth more? I would suggest serving, huge, and also tapping their ideas. So I find sometimes we try to slot them into the slots that we have, as opposed to sitting and going, well, you've been in our church for a while. Where are we not doing great? And what would you suggest we change? Excellent. Are you willing to lead that? And so we got a lot of young people involved in our social media because they're like, it's terrible. And so we're like, well, fix this. Or we don't know. We obviously don't know. And so they're like, no one's on Facebook anymore. And so they got us on Instagram and TikTok and all sorts, because we don't know. And so there's that engagement. How you engage them also more in church services and youth groups, I would suggest is asking them to contribute more. Often we still keep them in the receiving pose. And so sometimes it would be engaging more, doing debates. They love a debate. You know, this is a current debate in Christianity, this versus this. Anyone have where would you lean on a thing? Excellent. Why? And then you got to justify, not your position doesn't mean you have to do it biblically, but like, what are you saying? And what are you saying? Interesting. If I added this 3 verses into the idea, would you move on the scale? Interesting. And then we have that thing. And so it's more about them advocating for themselves in that. Sometimes I also do agony aunt situation, sort of like when you ask questions of the newspaper. Dear newspaper, I am facing this situation in my life. What should I do? And then the newspaper does that. So sometimes I can pose that to teenagers. You know, this is what's happening in my friend's life. It looks like this. She has colleagues that are persecuting her for her faith and laughing at her. What should she do? Advice. And then pull on them to go, oh, well, I do this and you do that and that. So that can be helpful as well. Also, an anonymous box of questions that I will always answer, but you don't have to own it. And so that's always helpful. And so to me, there's something about drawing them in and then having them teach, I think can be really helpful as well. To be like, you know, every week we'd like for somebody to take a Bible verse and say, what do we need to learn from this? And teach them how to do that. And so then half the talk is a kid giving a sermon or reflection or something. Or having them bring in I haven't done this, but it's an idea that I've been playing with for some of our youth group, is bring in a YouTube or TikTok clip of something that made you think about God. And so whether you're following something Christian or whether it's not Christian that made you think about something, come in and give your reflections on social media is an idea. And so you're getting them to, the more they participate in the direction of it, the more engaged they are, I find. Those would be my suggestions. Do you have any? Yes? All right. Families, church, and community. 7 minutes. Families, church, and community. For me, this integration thing I think is interesting. Sometimes I find that transition points, how do we get families from the out and the in into more church community stuff? I find transitions really helpful. So we just had every time I've done this, it's been really successful, where we take our toddler group. Do you run a toddler group? We're like a midweek mums and, okay. So what we hope is that they then jump into Sunday morning. So we try to take them from babies midweek. And then we want them to jump into Sundays. And I find that transition hard. And so creating a middle space that Sundays sort of come to them and this comes to them, I find really helpful. So we found that Christmas is an excellent time for this. And so we in the UK have a big tradition of carols. Christmas carols is a big thing. Everyone wants carols. But it's a nightmare to take an under 5 to a carol service because they will just walk around all the time. So what we created was a babies and toddlers carol service that we did in the morning, midweek, on a Saturday, the day before our normal sort of all-age Christmas service. And so we then really pushed that. And so it was a babies and toddlers carols. It had activities. It had we had our worship band from Sundays that came. We had our senior leader from Sundays that came. We pushed it to all of our Christian families to get them to come. So these people got to stay in their same space at their same time, but got to experience and engage with the people here. And what we found is then these people invited their friends. And so at this service, we had 5 families that we'd never seen before come to this one because they were invited by these. And 3 of those families then showed up the next Sunday at church because it was an all-age, and we said that they would be space, and we let them know, and they met everybody. And 2 of those families have now continued as part of our church community. But it needed this thing. It needed this bespoke middle step. And I don't know what that middle step would be for you, but I found the relationship building of this was really helpful. So the guy who came and played his guitar with his daughter who was dancing on the floor, and me rolling around on the floor doing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on my back with the kids ad nauseum. I'm the one who's preaching tomorrow, and the worship guy is the one who's leading worship, but they've just sat and chatted with us for 45 minutes, and they watched me play with their kid, and then we all sang Christmas carols together. And so the relationship, they weren't then walking into a weird space, they were walking into a place with people that they knew. And that was really helpful step. Every time I run a babies and toddlers carols, we see that next step. And so it's the next step between where are you naturally finding people. And I find this is the ask of where I bring them in. It's not my great advertising often that brings people in, it's the people that I know. And so if you have families on a Sunday and you're like, we want more families, I'd sit down with the 3 families that you have and go, what would you actually bring people to? Like what would you bring people to? And it could be after school, after church picnics. And so we found that one of the things was we were finding families, we were putting on Halloween stuff and they just weren't doing it, but they were like picnics they'd be big on. So we started doing on Sundays picnics with bouncy castles after church on a Sunday. And so therefore people would invite their friends to come join them after church, which meant that they got to build relationships, they got to see people, and then they got curious, and then they showed up 20 minutes early to see what was happening at the end of the service, and then we started seeing people come in from the picnics. But it wasn't because we advertised well, it was because people felt comfortable to bring their friends. Yes. Drop-off kids, how to get at parents. Okay, so for me, drop-off kids are hard. At some point, you have to get information about those kids because legally we have to know that we're legally okay to have them. And so at some point, there's got to be parent contact made. That's just like, hey, do you know your child is here? And are you okay with that? And do they have any allergies? Like at some point, information has to be given. And at that point, then you get at least a touch of a thing. And what I found really key in this parent thing is parents get really itchy if it looks like you're trying to build a wedge between them and their kids. And the kids that I have lost are the ones where I have thought, I'm the one discipling them and their parents don't matter anymore. And so what I found is I've got to go really hard to build relationships with parents. So for this, relationship in support and support. Often parents are so used to being used by schools, here are the things that you need to do, by clubs, don't forget to sign up for all this stuff, to just have someone come and be like, hey, your kid said you're moving house. Can I cook some food for you so that you don't have to deal with it? Or can I help you move all the stuff that, move the charities? How can I serve you in your house move? Or your kid was mentioning that, you have 5 kids and are struggling to walk them home. I'm really happy to walk them home. Like, just those little relationships are really helpful when you even just get the info. Also, what I started doing was once I have the info, sending stuff home once a term to those parents, whether it's on WhatsApp or whatever communication I have for them, that just says, hey, just want to let you know, we really appreciate having your kid with us. We think they're brilliant. And I don't know if you know this, but they speak really well of you behind your back. That's my shut up alarm. They speak really well of you behind your back. You're doing something great with your kid because your kid's brilliant, and we just really appreciate them. Parents never hear people communicate home about the good stuff. And to just be like, we really appreciate you, and your kid talks well about you behind your back, and we want to support that in any way, is really helpful. If you've got drop-off kids that you can see their bodies, I find standing outside youth groups helpful, because then I can wave at people, really helpful. I also started having people bake cake. And just being like, hey, we got a lot of extra cake. You want some cake? And people are like, yes, I want cake. And so then I would just give them chunks of cake as they dropped off their kids. And at some point then we started having some of the old folk who have no interest in youth but really like pastoral care started sitting outside and providing cups of tea. So then when people would drop off, they'd also be like, and I'll have some cake and tea. At which point all of my pastoral people are like, how's your life? What's going on? Hug, cry, take care of you. And they started just coming and getting pastoral care because they were there and we had cake. And so this relationship and support is something really interesting. And then providing side-by-side stuff. If you come to church, I'm going to give you one thing that you can do. So on Christmas, I would give them all baubles, like ornaments, that had like, God is love, or God is always with you. And in that service, I'd be like, if you're ever scared or worried, just reach out a finger like this, boop, and touch God, because he's that close every time. And I've had so many parents from the community see me on the streets and say, hey, that thing we did at Christmas, the boop thing with God. When my kid gets scared, I just say, just boop God, and you'll know God's with you. And they're like, I'm still not sure if there is a God, but it makes my kid feel better. And I'm like, excellent. To the extent that you have faith, you can help your kid meet and know Jesus. And so for me, it's about doing that side-by-side stuff that I can. And then, I don't transport paths online. Oh, and then being open about it. If I'm teaching your kid how to pray, I want you to know how to do that. So I'll just record a 2-minute video and pop it up on the social media page in case they want to look. So then I can always say, hey, we're working on prayer this term. If that freaks you out, you can look at this video and it'll tell you what we're saying to your kid. I found so many views from that because I'm saying I'm not doing something secret with your kid. And I don't want you to feel like an idiot when your kid comes home and talks about stuff you don't know about. So I'm just letting you know. And the last question is this. Sorry, we're 2 minutes over. You're very gentle. Children and giving. Is that how we talk about kids and money? I tend to say, I tend to put them in an all-age service and talk about it all. Well, no, I'm back and forth on it. To me, I don't talk about giving. I talk about generosity. Because we're called to give of ourselves in every area of our lives. And so sometimes that means your time. And sometimes that means being generous with your coolness factor. Sometimes there will be people who you don't want to be friends with because you think people will make fun of me, but actually being generous with your attention is a really powerful thing. Being generous with your money is a really powerful thing. And so talking about how people give. And some people give with money, some people give tithing, some people give to missionaries. I'm letting that be a normal part of the conversation with windows. So rather than it being an expectation, the thing is living generous lives is what we're called to. And so this is how people do it financially. This is how people do it with time. And so therefore you're creating windows, you're creating opportunities. I used to come in and ask the kids to pick a thing that we're going to raise money for every year. And kids would come in and be like, this is a charity. I'd pitch it to them. And then they would be like, this is what we want to give to. And I'd be like, excellent. Then that's what we do. And it's up to you to raise money. And kids were selling pictures and doing whatever. And they raised it and then we sent it. But then I also one year just said, do you know how much it costs to run this church? If we want lights, this is how much it requires. And kids were like, that's important. And I'm like, yeah. And so they started giving to the biscuits budget. And they were like, we're going to raise 400 pounds for good biscuits at church. And I'm like, excellent. Because sometimes you just give to the local church because we're all part of the thing. And so it's just allowing those conversations to me rather than requiring it of them. Doing it there. I'm over time. I apologize. Thank you for your day. I'll come sit over here. Sorry.
No, you can stand here.
Okay, I'll stand there. Fine.
Yeah. So we will say thank you so much for these fantastic hours.
Oh, thank you.
We have so much to multiply in our churches
Thank
now
you.
after this.
I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
And we will soon leave here, but I think we should pray for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Barbara, would you like to? Yeah, we need. Yeah, I can.
I don't pray on camera.
Ooh.